I probably would want to do more of or better or differently for this year, or something that we were going to need. And so I started thinking about, well, we need kindness. And so I started looking at some different books about kindness, and this one just jumped out to me. Good morning live stream. We were having a problem there at first, so I went ahead and started talking. We were so happy to have you with us, though. I'm glad that our technology decided to work. Um, so we are talking about the book Deep Kindness by Houston Kraft today. Apparently, I'm gonna lose my voice in the middle of it. I shouldn't speak that, should I? So Houston Kraft is an individual who goes around and he's kind of made it his mission to be a motivational speaker to educators and children. And so he goes around to all these different schools, and one of his big messages is kindness and how thank you. Thank you for the kindness of a cough drop. I need it. And so he goes around and he talks about how the world needs more kindness and what that means, and that there's skills that we can build on to become more kind. And so he starts out this book, and it's just so interesting. You know, everything is all parallel, right? You start reading something and you're like, oh, this is going to be so much different than everything I've ever read or heard. And then you start and you're like, oh no, it's like it's gelling with everything that I already know. And so it's a good reminder. And there's some things in here that are different perspective. But really, what I found in reading through is what he's terming as deep kindness. I think we here at Unity would term as love in action, because it's so much of what we talk about in how we cultivate that act of being love as we go out into the world. And so as I was reading, every time you say deep kindness, I kind of in my mind, it was like, yes, we're being love. We're out there acting, love in action. And so he points out at first, that our definition of kindness, just like anything else, is driven by our perspective. And it's the culmination of life experiences we have and the environment that shaped us, that shapes our perspective. And so, he says no perspective is inherently wrong. However, if we don't have the tools to reflect on our experiences and how we've defined the words in our lives, then we become the victim of hand-me-down definitions. And so that, to say that we accept the definitions that have been offered to us instead of wrestling with the possibility that a word can mean more or that it could be something different. And so, he talks about even just if you think about kindness and like really your definition of what does it mean to be kind, and then thinking about, well, where does that definition come from? And so he talks about one of the stories he tells is how his mother, she was a mom who packed a lunch. And he says, like, for every day, she packed his lunch all until his last day of senior year of high school, because and he said it was such, for him, that was, he said that to other people, and they're like, really? Until your senior year of high school? And he's like, she wanted me to be able to concentrate on my work and not have to think about where was lunch coming from? Did I have to get in the lunch line? Was I going to have enough time to eat? All those things. And he's like, so yeah, like I didn't mind eating sandwiches almost every day for lunch, and she packed a sandwich. But the other thing she did was she put a Post-it note or a little note of something in every single lunch. And he said, like, every single lunch, every single day, you could count on a note from mom. And he said, is that mine? Awesome. When the instructor's phone is the one. Okay. So sorry. My granddaughter, I'm sure, with an important question like, will you bring me food after church?
Yes.
Because that's usually what it is. So he talked about these notes, and he said, it wasn't just like a have a good day, love mom. It was things that sometimes it was, sometimes it was a word with a definition, like something that she thought maybe he needed to know the definition of, or she would find quotes that had something to do with something that was going on in their life at the time to inspire or guide or whatever, or she would put a compliment in there that was deeply personal and meaningful. And so he said they were notes from mom, but they weren't the generic like just notes. And so like things like that he's like, that just tells you what kind of person she was, that she was dedicated to doing that every single day, and that's how she treated me. And he goes, she treated others much the same, like she did things like that. And so his perspective of kindness comes from watching his mom pour out this love to others around her. And he's like, so, like that's my perspective of kindness. But other people, someone who, you know, grew up in maybe a single parent home that was struggling to make ends meet, and maybe that single parent was having to work extra long hours, perhaps kindness to them was bringing home a special treat after a long shift or something like that. Maybe they didn't have the time or the emotional capacity to pack a lunch every day and write a meaningful note in it, but there's other little things that happened along the way that were kindness. And he's like, so that's where it comes from. And then as we are in our adulthood and looking at that, really trying to figure out how do we expand our definition of kindness, and examine it to see, where we might be able to make some changes. He starts out too, he talks about, and this was when I first started, I was like, and then I'm like, oh no, okay, it makes sense. So he talks about the flippant way that we talk about kindness these days. That, we say things like, just be kind. Kindness is free. And his favorite is, be kind, throw it around like confetti. Like, throw kindness around like confetti. And so he says, and that's what he said, that's the most common poster he sees when he goes into schools is throw kindness around like confetti. And he's like, I want to gently tear that poster down from the hallways when I see it. Not because it's bad or wrong, but because it minimizes the importance of kindness in his mind. That it makes kids think that, like, oh, kindness is easy. It's just it's confetti. You just throw it out there. And that's all you need to do. And he's like, so it's well intentioned. And he's like, and certainly the world needs as much kindness in all ways possible. But if we stop there, then we're not truly teaching kids or holding ourselves accountable to being deeply kind individuals or being love in action, as like I said, we would say. And he says, so we often talk about kindness in this cute and playful way, instead of really digging in and talking about the kindness that the world needs. Sorry, I just saw this one, like, we fluffify it. That's a funny word. We fluffify kindness. And he says, what happens in our humanness, and I know this to be true for myself, so I take it in for myself, that when we make something sound too easy, we don't allocate the necessary resources, energy, and time to actually do it or improve it. Right? We take it for granted. It's just going to be there. We don't have to worry about it. And that's the part of the throw kindness around like confetti that he worries about, is that people don't take the time to actually sit and reflect and think about the acts of kindness that they are doing or the types of things that they could be doing. because they just think like, oh, it's just always a bunch. I can just grab it out of my pocket, throw it around like confetti. It's easy. And so he says, what if we talked about kindness in a way that did honor how hard it was? And we actually taught skills to children that supported the challenging and messy work of deep kindness. And so that's what he's made his mission to do. And he says, don't get me wrong, simple confetti-like actions of kindness are a piece of the puzzle. They're just not the whole puzzle. And um, so what do we think about that? Is anybody having any? Because I had to really pause and think about that for a minute.
Yeah. The past week, with Jimmy Carter's passing, I watched one week of YouTube about him being his kindness and stuff, and so I was looking through some stuff, and I had bought this book of Jimmy Carter about sources of strength, and this book is still available on Amazon.
Okay.
What's the name of it?
Jimmy Carter's Sources of Strength or Kindness?
Strength.
Sources of Strength, yeah.
So I just thought I'd check. And then I watched a YouTube about his life and everything. And he was one of the most spiritual people in that community that there was.
Kindness in our family is more like a habit. And you don't even have to think about it. And if you don't have to think about it, there's no work to it. It's an example is every time in the summertime, anytime that Wendy sees a little child selling lemonade, she'll buy it, no matter what it costs. She'll buy it. She might dump it out around the corner, but she'll buy it because she doesn't know how it was made.
Yeah.
But it's an act of kindness to encourage children to be resourceful.
The hardest thing for me in reaching further with the idea of that, I was so raised with that idea that love that never looks good. It was like I didn't want anyone ever to know anything I ever did, because it was almost like, I was going to get a smaller mansion in heaven if anybody knew. That feeling of nobody should know. And one of the hardest things for me was to begin to stop that. And it's amazing. I go into a store and I'm buying gloves, and I'm talking to people at the counter. You wouldn't believe how many people have handed me money or bought more gloves or done something just because they don't know how. And all you got to do is say, this is what I'm doing, or go to a yard sale. I can't tell you the times in a yard sale they've given me all their backpacks, they've given me blankets, and it's like they want to know where they can give another time. So that's one of the ways to bring more kindness in the world, is don't be afraid to talk about.
Yeah. Donna and Wendy are going to do the master class as always. We hit on two of his big key points as well. So he talks about that there's three types of kindness that he defines. And so there's common kindness, which is our pleases and thank yous and just common courtesy, politeness, just what you should be giving out in the world, that's demonstrative, and it just shows our respect for others. And he says that's all, like, absolutely we should be doing that. And we have to acknowledge that it's probably not changing the world in big ways, right? Like, I mean, it changes someone's experience in that moment, but it's probably not a movement that's changing the world. Um, and then he talks about that confetti kindness. Oh, yep, John.
Yeah, I would just say the butterfly effect is a real thing.
Yes.
So common kindness is a part of it.
Yes, and that's what he said. He's like, you can't do all. You have to have all three. But like, if we only focused on common kindness, we're cutting ourselves off from the connection and the impact that we could be having. And so then he talks about the confetti kindness, and he says that for him, this is the mass marketed feel good kindness. And so he says, it's like the small random acts, or it's the pay it forward coffee lines. And he's like, these acts, they're fun and they're generous and they provide hope that there's good people in the world, right? And so, like, that's also necessary, especially when we're feeling bleak or, maybe something heavy has happened in the world and we're trying to lighten things back up. And they're rooted in good intentions and earnest attempts to help, but they don't often get to the root of what people actually need. Like, they're great. They feel good to both the giver and the receiver, generally, but they're not like healing anything within inside either person in most cases. And so he's like, so it's the tiers. Like, you need both of those things. You should be doing common kindness and confetti kindness. But when we get into the deep kindness, so an example of the confetti kindness that he talked about that he's, because it's always well intentioned. But one of the stories that really stood out to him as he was traveling around and was that after the Sandy Hook school shooting, he said the school was inundated with teddy bears. And so it was well-meaning people who wanted to do something, who wanted to show their love and show that they were thinking of the families and everyone. And so they would show up to candlelight vigils, and he said the city administrators would talk about how the teddy bears outnumbered the people 2-1. Like, at these vigils, they had mounds. People would leave at any place that they had, like the memorials. There was just these like mountains of teddy bears. And at one point, the city had to rent a storage warehouse to put all the teddy bears so that they wouldn't get ruined, because they thought that would be an even bigger waste if they sat out in the weather, or what, like if they didn't take care of them, and then they had to donate them. And they were like, it was like they completely understood the sentiment of people wanting to show their love and their care and their concern. However, like, what the people needed was access to counseling and assistance with funerals and like the planning of that, or the coordination and the financing of that. And so while you could in that moment recognize like people were trying to shower the town with teddy bears as an act of love, there was a piece of it that became a burden, because then they had to, while they were trying to do all of the really heavy stuff, they also were then having to rent space and store teddy bears and then figure out where teddy bears were going to go and all of the things. And so he's like, sometimes we are well intentioned, but it's like kind of missing the mark a little bit, or we give the teddy bear and then walk away and we feel good about that. Oh, I gave my teddy bear, I showed that I love, but we don't think about what that is creating for the people, and was it truly helpful? Yeah, I know. I see Wendy's face. I'm like, I know. I would have the same, like, oh.
I'm not discounting what you're saying in there. The only thing is to just look at the material outcome of something to determine how valid or how important an act of kindness is. Every act of kindness changes us. Every act of kindness changes the person. I have had times where, I'm going down the street. We stopped to give some money to one woman walking down the street. And she goes, I remember you. She goes, one day I wasn't even, I didn't even want to even go on anymore or anything. And she goes, you saw me. You saw me. Now, what I do, what I hand out is not changing their lives. In if you look at it from just a material point of view. But that woman, who knows what she's going to do in her life because somebody saw her and did a small thing. And I just hate to see us diminish the small things, or even giving the teddy bear. Who knows? That may be the beginning of allowing someone to feel good about giving, and then they're going to give for the rest of their life. And so what if somebody has to find a place to put those teddy bears? Hooray! So I guess, and a lot of people don't do anything because they're afraid it's not enough, because they're afraid they're not going to do the right thing. And you just got to do something.
So when I saw that Amy was going to do this class, I just downloaded the sample on Kindle, and I struggled because it was kind of diminishing these apps, and at the same time, and I'm like, I'm going to wait to actually get the Kindle book until I hear what Amy has to say Sunday morning. But I'm open because what I'm hearing is not that he's not saying don't do these things. What I'm hearing is that he's saying we need to understand, and our crisis cold weather shelter to me is the classic example, that we have to get outside of our comfort zones and step into kindness in a deeper and a bigger way than we ever have in our lives. And when we step into deep kindness, that usually is going to take us out of our comfort zone. So
Yes.
So I totally hear what you're saying and agree, and I'm open to hear what the rest of the book is about. Yeah.
Something else when you're talking about these
Can you
things.
hold it closer? We can hear
Closer.
Yeah.
I feel like
You
I'm
can't
talking
hear
loud
online
enough.
if you
Everyone's
don't.
like, talk louder. With talking about these things, I think what he's saying is, like, I think we're agreeing, don't not do these things, but don't stop there. And what occurred to me is with the teddy bears that, I certainly wouldn't discourage anybody from doing that, but I think sometimes when somebody sees a major problem, it's one thing to, okay, I'm going to send a teddy bear and then feel like, okay, I did something. And then it's easy to become kind of complacent at that point and feel like I did something, which is wonderful. You did do something, but what would be a more meaningful kind of action? And I know with the school shootings, that's, it gets very politicized as to what to actually do with it. But how long has this been going on, and nothing seems to have really substantially changed about it? And people can argue out, gun laws and things like that. But even just doing deeper studies of, where is this coming from? What are some of the commonalities of, the shooters? What are some of the safety things in place? I don't know, it just seems like that is an area where, yes, lots of teddy bears have been sent, but the deeper act of kindness would be to really lean into, what can we do to really keep this from happening?
Yeah.
At least
Well, and it's not like, I'll give another example other than the teddy bears. That one is like little hits the heart. But so like we at work, we were trying to do employee appreciation for a week, right? And so one of my supervisors was able to get there was some snacks, and so we did like a sweet treat day. I don't know. I think we did like how sweet it is to work with someone like you. And so everyone came in, and on their desks they had all of these treats that the leadership team we put them together, and we'd arranged them on their desk all cute, and we had signs on everybody's desk. And partway through the day, we heard one of our staff kind of make a disparaging comment about it or whatever. And we, of course, our ego is like, well, we thought about this, we planned it, like we tried to do a nice thing for you. And then we had the realization that, oh, he probably isn't real thrilled with coming in and finding his desk full of sweet treats because he 6 months ago was diagnosed with type 1 or type 2 diabetes and has had to change his entire diet. And in our attempt to be kind and fun and do the same thing for everyone, we put all of this stuff on his desk that he cannot eat. So he walked in and was like, oh, okay. How sweet it is to work with you guys too, who don't pay attention to the fact that I can't eat any of this stuff. And so, and I think he was, he was still very early in that journey of having to change his diet. So there were some things that before his diagnosis, he would have been super happy about the snacks that we left. But what we did, instead of doing an act of kindness for him, is we put like a really challenging willpower experiment on his desk of like, will you make yourself give it away or take it home to your child or whatever? And so he was having some feelings about that. And like I said, when he first was like, yeah, our sweet treat, like that's what he said, something like, oh yeah, our treats. Because someone else who was excited about the treats was like, woo, I'm gonna eat my treats. And he's like, oh yeah, the treats.
Amy, but remember, the bad guy's always the goodest guy. And so you actually did him a favor by causing him to look at his
But I'm just saying, like, in his mind, did he feel like we felt like we had gone above and beyond to make this, like, super special? But to him, that did not feel like kindness in the moment. And so sometimes and that's the difference between what Houston calls the confetti kindness and the deep kindness. Deep kindness, we would have looked at each individual person, or we would have said, like, is there any reason that someone might not like this? And maybe we would have altered his desk arrangement with things that we know he can now eat and treat himself with. Yeah, Don.
There's always the element too that it seems to be contagious when you do. For example, the teddy bears, that there was an excess of them. The city or the town had this overabundance of teddy bears, and were really almost forced into doing something kind to somebody else. So it was a serious thing that can happen if you do something that causes someone else to respond in the same way, and you provide the very wherewithal to do it. And the same thing happens every time you see someone doing something laudable. It sparks something in you to think, I could do that too.
Yes. And so he goes in to talk about the deep kindness. So he says deep kindness to him is the kind of kindness that overcomes selfishness and fear, the sort of generosity that expects nothing in return, the unconditional care that is given despite a person's shortcomings or ugliness, and the commitment to consistently and thoughtfully do action. So to me, that sounds like the definition of love in action for us here at Unity, right? And so he says the deep kindness is what requires careful self-reflection and courage and a willingness to be humbled and a good use of our social and emotional skills. And it doesn't just happen because we believe in kindness. It's something we have to actually work toward incorporating into our habits of living. And that there's infinite room for improvement. Yeah.
Part of it is if you have some place in your life where you don't feel so kind. Like for me, it was standing in lines at the store. So I thought about it beforehand, and I said, how can I do this differently? How can I change how I'm feeling here? And so what I thought of is I just thought, everything that's important is here in this moment. Love is still here. All of the things, the connection to source is still. So I came up with a saying for myself that I just said, the place where I now stand is a very good place. And here, And you'd be surprised that one time there was this huge, tall man that was so upset and everything. And he turns to me finally, he's trying to figure something out with the person. Finally, he turns to me and he goes, I'm sorry, I'm taking so much time. I just looked at him and I said, the place where I now stand is a very good place. And I was feeling good. And he goes, can I touch your face? And he reached down, he touched my face, and I reached down and touched his face, and we looked at each other with love in each other's eyes, and had a moment that was so beautiful. If you just make a decision beforehand, you're going to do something different. And that's just one of many examples.
Yeah. And that's, so he talks about that at one point in the book, that like to cultivate that kindness, and it's exactly that. Like we have to, if we want to build it into our routine, like often we do better when we have something that there's like a cue that reminds us, oh, this is the time when I was going to do XYZ, or this is what it's. So like for Wendy, now it's like standing in line at the store. Oh, I'm standing in line at the store. Where I stand now is a very good place. Like you build that in, and then it changes how you show up in that moment. Yeah, John.
So, that next week I'm talking about the second part on self-compassion. And so that Wendy just gave a beautiful example. It was self-compassion, an act of self-compassion that she chose to practice while standing in line, which then if you're experiencing self-compassion, compassion to others becomes more of a natural act, which in action is love in action.
Yeah, it all, yes, absolutely. It's all going to go right together because, and it's all about, it's the stuff that we've done before on like emotional intelligence and spiritual intelligence. It's all of these skills, are what's needed for us to move forward in all of those areas. And so, and that's the next thing on here. Deep kindness requires empathy, resilience, courage, and forgiveness. And so with the empathy part, it's how am I supposed to give you something you truly need if I don't actually attempt to understand what you need first? And that's kind of what we were talking about with the other things. Like, it's not, and what he talks about with that is, sorry, there was so much, me, I always like, I could do a 4-part on everything and I have to bring it back now. So he talks about the fact that we, often when we're doing that like confetti type kindness, when we get stuck there, it's because it feels comfortable. Like it feels good. We get a little bit of feel good from it. We know other people enjoy it. And it becomes what we're used to, and we can do it. Like we feel confident. We feel like we have the skills to do that. And so we kind of get stuck there. And he's like, but like with really cultivating empathy, you have to be willing to like stretch that and not just do what feels comfortable all the time. And he gave an example of how, we get into such ruts, and he was talking about like going to the gym. And he's like, I go to this gym that has a ton of workout equipment. He goes, but I know how to use like 3 machines. And he goes, so which machines do you think I use every time I go to the gym? The 3 that I know how to use. He's like, but there's all these other machines that probably could do wonderful things for my health and fitness, but I have to be brave enough to look a little silly trying to figure it out. And so far, that hasn't happened. And so he says that we do the same thing with like kindness and empathy and all these things, that like if we have that fear of failure or the fear of rejection or something kind of looming over us, we cut ourselves off and we just do the comfortable thing and then stop.
And I guarantee you that when you try new machines, you will experience pain.
Yes.
The next day, you'll feel the lactic acid build up, and those muscles that you don't really want to use, you'll know.
Well, and he talks about, so he starts out his story, or starts out the book with a story about a lady that he met on an airplane. And he talks about how he was, getting on the plane, and he was in, I'm going to take a nap on the plane mode. But he was in the middle seat. And he said this woman gets on the plane, and just from the very beginning, he's like, I could, he can tell that this is not going to be a nap on the plane kind of trip, because this woman is wanting to talk to him. And so they get into this whole conversation of her asking him all these questions about what he does and all the things. And so he talks, I go around and talk about kindness. And she's like, oh my gosh, kindness is so needed. And so she starts telling him a story because she had been in education also. And anyway, so she's telling him a story about that she's so nervous to be on the plane because it's the first time she's flown since a few years back when she was getting on a plane. She had gotten a call that her father was not doing well and that she needed to get to him as quickly as possible. Basically, she wanted to say her goodbyes. And so she had bought her plane ticket, was waiting at the airport when someone called her to let her know that he had transitioned. And so she got on the plane knowing that she was no longer going to say her goodbyes, but she was going to make all the arrangements. And so she was really overwhelmed. And she said she was like in shock the whole plane ride. And then she got to the airport that she was arriving at and like stumbled over to the side and just sat down on the floor and was sobbing. And she said she sat there, she ended up sitting in the floor for like hours, like a couple of hours, just trying to get herself together. And in that time, not one person walked over to her to ask her if she was okay, if she needed anything, if they could help her. Like no airport employees, none of the thousands of people. And this was a busy airport. He estimates that at least like 3,000 people had to walk by her with the way that how many people this airport has coming through. And so she talked about that, and she even said, she's like, in the moment, she was sitting there thinking, how can nobody see me? Like, what is going on that no one can come and offer her kindness? And she was like, but I've come to realize after that nobody knew what to do. Like they didn't know me. They didn't know what was going on. There was probably some people were in a hurry. They were going to miss a flight if they didn't keep walking. There's all the different things. But he gives that as an illustration of like, sometimes it's really scary just to ask, are you okay? Or can I help? Because you don't know what you're about to get yourself into, right? Like, and so if you don't feel comfortable with your own skills of like empathy and resilience and forgiveness and all the things, then that's like a pain to avoid. And so that's what he talks about, the bystander effect and how people will walk by someone obviously in trouble. And that especially if there's more people around, we have this really interesting thing we do in our brains where we're like, oh, well, it's not just my response, but like nobody else is helping either. So apparently it's okay to keep walking, or somebody will stop eventually. Somebody else who has more skills than me will stop eventually. And so there is that, and I think either Dawn or Wendy said something about like this kind of courage and kindness. Like you have to be willing to maybe be rejected a few times or look a little silly, or even, have somebody mock you for your kindness instead of celebrate it. And so that's where you have to be empathetic, but then also the resilience. So he's like, it takes a lot of fortitude to get rejected, hurt, or laughed at, and then continue to show up as kindness again and again. Because you have to be able to separate that from like, it's not about you, separate, that shouldn't shut down your kindness or your love. And that we have to be resilient to keep giving that unconditional love in conditions, especially conditions that are, I think you said, tainted with hate or more geared towards hate. Like if there's a lot of that, like to stand up and do the kind and loving thing is very courageous. Yeah.
Well, that brings me to the Belong book that we just finished in group study. Is you have to belong to yourself enough that you don't care what anybody else says, and that you can feel within yourself what is right to do. And we're not taught how to do that very often. You know, thank goodness for Brene Brown, but we don't realize that most people don't have that confidence. They don't know that they belong to themselves, and so they're so programmed to react the way everybody else reacts that we have a herd mentality, and everybody waits for somebody else to do it.
Mhm. Yeah, and he talks about even things like, he's like, especially with social media, we've got all these videos and things out there. He's like the free hug thing, and we do hugs at MSU. And he's like, what people don't often show, he's like, when they're, publicizing the free hug events or whatever, they show the deep and meaningful hugs that happen, the people that are so happy to get the hug. He's like, what they don't often show is the, 20 people who walked by and like increase their speed as they walked by or wouldn't make eye contact or said, oh, no, thank you, or, or whatever. Like there was some form of rejection, but they often show just like the ones that are meaningful. And he's like, but the people who keep showing up to give those free hugs know that the people who scurry away or don't make eye contact or whatever, like that's okay because they don't need that hug or they don't feel comfortable with it. But the people who do need it, you're being available for them. And he's like, but there's a lot of rejection in trying to do something nice. I'm on a group. Sorry, Wendy. I'm on a group for Silver Dollar City pass holders, and it just made me think that like there's been all these posts. So you get free bring a friend passes, or you get like discounted passes when you have a season pass. And there's people that have talked about, a lot of times people who don't have family or other people to use them on, if they're going to the park themselves, they'll take them with them, and then they'll find someone in line and be like, hey, I have a discount pass. Would you like me to go through the line with you, or I could get you in free? And there's been discussion on the group of like how many people think that's a scam and are like, no, I'm going to buy my ticket. No, thank you. And they're like, no, really, I'm trying to get you in free. Like I have a free ticket. I'm trying to give it away. And they're like, it's so sad that we're so programmed to like think of everything as a scam. And like there was one person, one of the last like part of Christmas season, she was like, I could not give away my, like no one would let me get them in free. Wow. And she said, I don't, she's like, it was so sad to me because you used to be able to do that and make somebody's day, and other people were like, we've got people to accept. She was like, I just was so happy, like I'm gonna give my ticket away and make somebody's day, and she's like, nobody would take my free ticket.
So that goes right into what I was just gonna say is, again, one of the hardest things for me was to learn kindness is not about me doing an act. Kindness is about an energy, being part of an energy. And the hardest thing for me was to allow other people, it'd be like someone would say, would do, and it'd be like, oh, no, I don't need it, stuff like that. And it's amazing. In the last week, I've had 2 times someone pay for my food in the store. And to just be able to say thank you was one of the hardest things I had to practice.
Yeah. There was this little part he pointed out. So if you look at, he says, the research that they've done where they like, I don't know, they look at sales and things. And he says, so people in this country buy more Advil or painkillers than vitamins. And so he's like, this means we readily look for things to alleviate pain more frequently than we pursue actions or practices that might reduce the pain in the first place or prevent it. And like that's a simple correlation, but he's like, it's true if you look at many things. Like we like to avoid pain, right? Like who wants to just sit around in pain? But we don't often like to build the habits that would keep us from not needing those medications or other things. And so his whole point is just that he thinks that kindness is the single most important ingredient for a healthy, connected, and conscious world, and that it's it is the cure. And I think we would say, like, we would reterm that as like love. Love is the necessary ingredient, and love is the cure to all of this. Let's see, we're getting close on time. So he goes into like the action part of this, like things that you can do and ways that you can maybe think about kindness or practicing some of that deeper kindness so that you're not just stuck in the same things as always. And so he talks about complimenting people. Could be one of the most effective and low burden exercises available to us. And that we all know that words matter. And so he says we are like we have the power to hurt or heal through our words, and we all know that. But he wants us to, and this is in other things too, like be more specific with compliments. And so he says, think of it as the difference between receiving that post-it note or something with a generic compliment like you're beautiful or you're kind or you're sweet or whatever, which is all nice, right? And you would receive that with love. But if someone gave you a card that gave you details about how you had influenced their life, or they called you up and said, hey, I just was thinking about you and I just wanted you to know how much of an impact you've had on me. I watch you courageously walk through the world and it inspires me to be braver in my actions or whatever. Like that's gonna like hit you much deeper than just like, hey, I really like you, or hey, you're great. Right? Because I mean that feels good, but we don't like make the connection with why. And we talk about this too in like giving feedback to anyone really, but especially like children, instead of just saying great job, like I saw the way you really thought about that problem and came up with a solution all on your own and then tried it out, and when it didn't work you came up with something different. That was really impressive. Like that gets to the heart of why I think that was a great job and helps them internalize, oh, so like that was the thing, like that's what someone else saw me doing that was good about the situation. So he says, like really think about that. So think about some of the most memorable compliments that you've ever received in your life. Like what made them special? They were probably deeply personal. They were probably from someone you respected or admired. And it probably touched on something that maybe you were struggling with your own worthiness, or maybe you didn't see in yourself and you were amazed that somebody else saw it, or maybe it was something that you thought nobody had been noticing. And to know that someone did actually see you made all the difference in you moving forward. And so one of his exercises,
Well, a couple of weeks ago, maybe about a week or so ago, I'd walked to the Walmart neighborhood market to get some food and stuff. So I was getting ready to walk back home, and this car stopped and said, "You're gonna be caught out in the dark," because it was later than I thought it was. Anyway, they said, "We'll take you home." And they were just people that I'd never seen before or nothing. They wouldn't know where I lived. I told them where I lived. And I thought, nah, I can just go ahead and walk home. But then some little something in me told me just to let him give me a ride. And on the way, I guess it worked out good for both of us, because this lady was a nurse, a home health nurse, and she had just found out that her youngest daughter had come out to her as being a lesbian. And she said, I just can't. She said she's gonna go to hell and all this, and I said, all this, and I said, not necessarily. I said, I know a church that she could go to that where she could feel accepted and everything. We told her about unity. She said, there's actually a church that people that gay people can go to and feel comfortable. And I said, yes, there is. And it is Unity of Springfield. So I thought, after that, I said, everything happens for a reason, and we don't always know what the reason is.
Yep.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you for that. So, yes, thank you. Sorry, I'm feeling like we're like, I need to get this done in 5 minutes. So he talks, so his exercise of compliments is doing just that, like thinking of someone that you can pay a compliment to, and like kind of like the homework for this week would be to think of one person and either call them or send them a text or an email. And so he gives some like fill in the blank kind of stuff if you're struggling with that. And so he says, like, to someone who pushes you to believe in yourself, that you can message, without your constant blank, I never would have had the ability to accomplish whatever. I feel confident enough to keep going now. Thank you. Like, if you received that text message, or you got that phone call, or you got that handwritten note that said that, or to someone who gives great hugs, did you know your hugs are like, they make me feel so, like, it always makes my day to get a hug from you. They are even better than whatever. That those kinds of things might be the deeply kind words that keep someone going or motivate someone to keep showing up in that way for other people. Some of this we've already talked about. So he talks about emotional regulation. And that's just that whole thing of like, sometimes our desires don't match our abilities. And so we might have unsolved problems in our lives, and not enough tools in our toolbox to navigate them. And so there's going to be times when your actions just aren't really lining up. And that's just a signal to be like, oh, hey, what skill do I need to work on? And so with emotional regulation, which is could be a whole thing. I'm looking at John. He's smiling because we could do like probably a 10-part talk on that. And so things that you can do for self-regulation, things like mindfulness, bringing yourself back to the present, cognitive reframing, so reinterpreting a situation to adjust the emotional response. So example, and this is where some of that forgiveness piece comes in for others, like instead of saying like, oh, they didn't call me back, I knew they hated me, I knew they, they didn't want to talk to me. That if you reframe that and you're like, oh, they didn't call me back, oh, I wonder if they're feeling really busy and overwhelmed. That changes our action, right? Because then that's oh, maybe I should check in on them again, or maybe I should see if there's anything I could do, versus they didn't call me back, I knew they hated me, or I knew they didn't value my friendship. That's going to close us off, right? And like keep us moving further away from the connection that we're actually desiring. So he talks about like part of the work is you could sit down and like if there's something that you're like, oh, I've been in a really negative headspace about that you could actually write it out and then like reframe it like 3 different ways, like make yourself write out 3 different possibilities, and see if it changes your emotions surrounding that or the action that you want to have. And then our emotional vocabulary, getting beyond happy, sad, mad talk and really getting into other words and knowing how, like, what does your body do when it's feeling embarrassed, and where does that come from, and how does it change your action, and how can you move through it, and all of that. See what the most important stuff here at the end is. So he says the kind of kindness the world needs is one that pays better attention, listens well in order to love better, and is empathy in action. That we can become more open, attuned, and skilled as we practice kindness in ways that are deeply healing instead of shallowly helpful, which is still good. Just we're striving to like do the one step better.
Oh my God, I can't keep my mouth shut any longer.
And that we have to be vulnerable. Yes.
Go ahead.
No. Go.
Yeah, no, you go. I'm gonna take a minute.
That's why it's 10:13, so we're gonna close here.
Yeah. So there's other stuff in it, so I'll just tell you what's it. So there's towards the end of the book, he talks about vulnerability in action. He gives some different ways that you can like practice being vulnerable with yourself. And I thought one of the funny, like a simple step in being vulnerable is dress differently for the day. And so he says, like, try overdressing or underdressing or wearing something that maybe you purchased and you stuck in the back of your closet, but you've never quite felt comfortable wearing it out of the house. And he's like, if you have to experience standing out in a small way, then it like makes you more comfortable to learn how to stand out in bigger ways. So like those are the things that you can do to just practice that vulnerability. Nothing huge, but just like stretching your comfort zone little by little. And he breaks things down into like, here's something you could do with yourself. Here's something you could do with a family member. Here's something you could do with a close friend. And then the consistency part is it, and this is what goes back to what Donna and Wendy were saying. So our repeated actions shape our identity. And he says, wouldn't it be cool to have the whole world adopt even one regular act of kindness that they consistently do without fail in that time. And he points to some research that shows, which was kind of disturbing to me, 45% of our time is spent in routines. Almost half of our day we spend doing routine activities, almost on autopilot. And so he was like, if the suggestion is to build a kindness routine into the 45% routine, at least, so that we're doing something routine that is meaningful. And I'll print out, I have a handout of some example ways to practice deeper kindness, like a 30-day kindness activity. It's got some different suggestions. And then if you look him up, he actually has just released, like there's a 30-day journal that is available as a PDF, but then he just released a 52-week journal called Be Kind. And he developed it, like I said, primarily I think for his work within the schools and with educators. But people are now saying that like they've started using it for those those who are experiencing like addiction and going through stepped programs and things, because it is about you can't get to that level of being deeply kind to others if you're not also being deeply kind to yourself. And so it's showing that it's working both ways. And I'll just tell you guys, so I have the download of the PDF one on my computer up here, and if you want to look at it, because I think the 52-week one is very similar. Sorry, my computer's being weird. But if you want to come up and look at that, I'll show it to you after class, and then I'll have Lisa print out some of these 30-day of kindness things for people to have. Do you want to do announcements, John?
Sure. Okay, announcements. Meditation is tonight at 6 p.m. It's open to everyone. Tomorrow evening, the grief support group will meet at 6 p.m. Unity Drum Circle is this Thursday, January 16th at 6:30 p.m. Bring a drum if you have one. Everyone is welcome to join in, and they do have some extra drums if you don't have one. Our chair yoga class is on Wednesday instead of Thursday this week. This is a combination of stretching, exercise, and yoga. The class is led by a certified yoga instructor, and the cost is $8 per session. Due to the weather, treasure mapping workshop has been moved to this Saturday, January 18th at 10 a.m. Next Sunday at 9:15 in the New Thought and World Religion Adult Education class, John Brocker will present part 2 on self-compassion, which we'll be doing, it's going to be a lot of skill stuff towards the self-compassion, which just leads right into what we were talking about this morning. Join us next Sunday, right after the service, for the first planning meeting for our 8th annual Planet Unity. This is our annual event that we do to raise awareness about the about the importance of taking care of our planet. And it is also our biggest fundraiser. This year's theme is Our Power, Our Planet. Please consider being part of the planning. Our annual meeting and potluck will be on January 26th, right after the service. Please plan to join us to learn what's going on with our church. Are you planning to become a member of our church? Do you think you probably joined the church years ago but aren't sure? There's a list of active members in the office if you'd like to check. If you've had a period of 12 months where you weren't active, you may have been moved to the inactive list by our bylaws. Save the date. We will have a new member ceremony on April 6th during the service. During inclement weather, there are 2 ways you can find out if any church activity or service has been canceled. 1, check your email. We will send out a group message. 2nd, check Unity of Springfield's Facebook page. Reminder, if the schools in Springfield are closed, all activities of the church will be closed for that day. We are halfway through our shelter season. Our shelter has been open 31 nights, which equates to over 800 cots filled. Tonight will be our 13th night open in a row, and extended forecast shows we have several more to go. So far, 54 different volunteers have covered over 1,100 hours, and so many more have prepared food, donated supplies, or money for supplies. We are so grateful for every single hour, meal, dollar, and item donated. Every single thing matters and makes a difference. Thank you all.
All right, thank you. I want to circle up in the back.